U.S. Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs, January 1984. Elijah Crawford moved the mop across the third-floor hallway in precise squares, each stroke overlapping the last by exactly 3 inches. He'd learned the pattern 30 years ago, his first week as a janitor at the U.S. Air Force Academy. The floor supervisor had shown him once. Crawford never needed a second demonstration. It was 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in January 1984. The cadets wouldn't appear for another hour. Crawford preferred these quiet mornings, when the building belonged to him and the fluorescent lights hummed their steady electric song. No voices, no questions, no one asking him to explain himself. He was 69 years old, thin as winter wheat, with grey hair cropped military short out of habit rather than regulation. His hands were weathered, knuckles swollen from arthritis that got worse each winter. The tuberculosis in his lungs, diagnosed 40 years ago in a German prison camp, made him wheeze when he climbed stairs, but the work was manageable. Mop floors, empty trash, keep the academy clean for young people who would become officers and lead soldiers, and maybe die in wars that hadn't started yet. Crawford reached the display case mounted on the east wall and stopped mopping. The case held photographs and plaques honoring Air Force Academy graduates who had received the Medal of Honor. 11 men total, spanning Vietnam, Korea, and World War II. Their faces looked out from behind glass, frozen at the moment of their official portrait, most of them young, all of them serious. The bottom right photograph showed a man in an army uniform from 1944. The placard beneath read, "Elijah Crawford, Private First Class, U.S. Army Company 1st, 142nd Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division, Altavilla, Italy. September 13th, 1943. Medal of Honor, posthumous." Crawford stared at his own face, 40 years younger, looking back at him from behind glass. The army photographer had made him sit still for 3 minutes while adjusting the camera. Crawford remembered being irritated. He'd wanted to get back to his squad, back to cleaning his rifle, back to the familiar routines of infantry life. That photograph had been taken in August 1943, 1 month before Altavilla, 1 month before everything changed. A cadet walked past, boots clicking on the polished floor, moving fast toward the stairwell. He glanced at Crawford the way people glanced at furniture, registering presence without interest, and kept walking. The cadet had probably walked past this display case 100 times, probably knew the names by heart for some military history exam, probably never imagined that one of those names belonged to the old man mopping floors. Crawford returned to his mop and bucket. He had 3 more hallways to finish before the morning shift ended. The work was simple, repetitive, exactly what he wanted. No one expected a janitor to be extraordinary. That was fine with Crawford. He'd been extraordinary once, for 51 minutes on a hillside in Italy. It had nearly killed him. The rest of his life he'd spent being deliberately, carefully ordinary. He pushed the mop bucket toward the west wing, leaving wet tracks on polished tile, and tried not to think about German helmets silhouetted against a grey morning sky. September 9th to 12th, 1943, Salerno, Italy. 4 decades earlier, and an ocean away, Private First Class Elijah Crawford had crouched in a foxhole that smelled like volcanic ash and blood, listening to German machine guns tear the night apart. The 36th Infantry Division had landed at Salerno on September 9th, 1943, expecting light resistance. The intelligence officers had promised a quick advance inland, German forces in retreat, minimal opposition. They'd been catastrophically wrong. The Germans held every piece of high ground surrounding the beachhead. Observation posts with perfect fields of fire. Artillery pre-registered on every approach route. Machine gun positions dug into rocky hillsides, interlocking fields of fire that turned the coastal plain into a killing floor. Hill 424 dominated the terrain west of Altavilla, a volcanic limestone ridge rising 420 meters above sea level. Steep slopes, sparse vegetation, stone terraces, built centuries ago by farmers who'd abandoned the land when the fighting started. The Germans had occupied the hill 4 days ago and fortified it with professional efficiency. 3 MG34 machine gun positions controlled the approaches. Company I had discovered this the hard way. On the night of September 12th, Lieutenant Nathaniel Garris had ordered an assault at 2300 hours. 2 platoons, roughly 80 men, advancing upslope under cover of darkness. The plan was simple: reach the German positions before they could react, eliminate the machine guns with grenades and rifle fire, secure the crest. The plan had failed within the first 60 seconds. The MG34s had opened fire simultaneously, coordinated and devastating. The cyclic rate was 900 rounds per minute, 15 bullets per second per gun, 45 rounds per second total, all of them searching for American bodies in the darkness. 9 men had died in the first 2 minutes. 14 more were wounded. The rest had gone to ground, pressing themselves into shallow depressions in the volcanic rock, unable to advance, unable to retreat, pinned down by fire that never seemed to stop. Crawford had been part of the reserve squad, held back at the base of the hill in case the assault succeeded and reinforcements were needed. He'd watched the tracer rounds arc through the darkness, listened to the screaming, counted the seconds between machine gun bursts. 18 seconds. That was the interval. 8 to 12 rounds fired, traversed left to right, then 18 seconds of silence while the gunner adjusted or reloaded or waited for movement. 18 seconds. Not enough time to cross open ground, barely enough time to move 3 meters if you were fast. But Crawford wasn't interested in being fast. He was interested in being patient. By 0300 hours on September 13th, the survivors of the assault had crawled back to American lines. 9 dead on the hillside, 14 wounded. Nothing gained. Hill 424 remained in German hands. Lieutenant Garris had called together his squad leaders in a shell crater that served as company headquarters. He was 24 years old, West Point class of 41, and he looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 6 hours. "Artillery barrage at 0600, Garris said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "We'll hit them with everything we've got, then send 2 companies up simultaneously. Overwhelming force. We take that hill or we die trying." Sergeant Boyd Ashford had nodded. He was career Army, 15 years in uniform, and he'd seen enough failed assaults to know what "we die trying" actually meant. "What about recon?" he'd asked. "We don't know exactly where those machine guns are positioned. We know they're up there, that's enough." "Sir, if we had better intelligence on their exact positions..." "Sergeant, we don't have time for reconnaissance. The beachhead needs that hill secured by noon, or the entire division is at risk." Crawford had spoken up then, which was unusual. He rarely spoke in these meetings. "I can locate them." Every head had turned toward him. Crawford was 28 years old from Pueblo, Colorado, and his service record was unremarkable. No citations, no commendations, no combat kills before landing at Salerno. Sergeant Ashford had written in Crawford's last evaluation, "Adequate soldier, follows orders, lacks tactical imagination." "You can locate them how?" Garris asked. "Get close, observe their firing patterns, map the positions." "Crawford, there are 3 machine guns up there covering every approach. You'd be dead in 5 minutes." "Not if I move like I'm hunting." "Hunting?" Crawford had tried to explain, but the words came out wrong. He'd spent 4 years hunting mule deer in the San Isabel National Forest west of Pueblo. 4 years learning to move through terrain without being detected. 4 years of patience and careful observation and understanding that the animal you could see wasn't the one that would kill you. It was the one you didn't see. "I know how to get close to things that don't want to be found," Crawford had finally said. "Deer. Germans. Same principles." Garris had stared at him for a long moment. Then, "Stay in the goddamn hole, Crawford. We'll wait for artillery." "Sir, artillery might not..." "That's an order, Private." Crawford had nodded and returned to his position. But orders and intentions were different things. He'd learned that hunting, too. You could intend to shoot a deer from 400 yards, but if the wind shifted or the animal moved, Your intentions didn't matter. You adapted or you failed. At 05:17 hours on September 13th, while Lieutenant Garris slept in his shell crater and Sergeant Ashford dozed against a tree, Crawford had gathered his equipment and begun moving uphill toward the German positions. He carried an M1 Garand rifle, 4.3 kilograms, effective range 500 meters, 8 rounds loaded, with 48 additional rounds in 6 spare clips on his belt. He carried 3 Mk2 fragmentation grenades, each weighing 227 grams, each with a 5-meter lethal radius. He carried a canteen half full of water that tasted like iodine. He did not carry a helmet. The steel dome reflected moonlight and created a distinctive silhouette. Crawford had removed it before leaving the company perimeter, replacing it with a knit cap pulled low over his ears. His uniform was standard olive drab wool, but Crawford had rubbed mud on the fabric to kill the smell of army-issue soap. Deer could smell soap at 200 meters. He assumed Germans could too. The first machine gun position was 35 meters upslope from where Crawford started. He could see the muzzle flash whenever they fired, a yellow-orange blossom that bloomed and died in microseconds. The gun was positioned behind a stone terrace wall, part of the ancient agricultural system that terraced the entire hillside. Crawford had been watching that position for 20 minutes, counting the rhythm of fire. 8 to 12 round bursts, 18-second intervals, systematic coverage of the slope below. Between bursts, he could hear them talking, German voices, calm and professional. They weren't afraid, they were just doing their job, and they were good at it. Crawford began moving at 05:23 hours. Not crawling, not low crawling, just sliding forward on his stomach, elbows pulling his body over volcanic rock, inches per minute. He kept his face turned right so the pale skin of his cheek wouldn't reflect ambient light. He breathed through his mouth to avoid the whistle of air through nostrils. Every 10 meters, he stopped and waited, listening. The machine gun fired again, 12 rounds. Crawford counted the seconds until the next burst. 18. Exactly. He moved during the silence, froze during the firing. Patient, methodical. The way his father had taught him to approach a bedded mule deer in aspen groves at 7,000 feet, where one wrong sound meant going home empty. Crawford covered the first 20 meters in 18 minutes. The second and third machine guns were somewhere upslope, maybe 75 meters higher, positioned to provide mutual support and cover any dead ground the first gun couldn't reach. Crawford couldn't see them yet. He would have to eliminate the first position before he could locate the others. At 05:44 hours, Crawford reached the stone terrace wall. The machine gun was 4 meters to his left, barrel protruding through a gap in the stones. He could see the gunner's shoulder, the assistant gunner feeding an ammunition belt from a metal container, a third soldier sitting with his back against the wall, smoking a cigarette. 3 men, professional soldiers, doing exactly what they'd been trained to do. Crawford pulled a grenade from his belt. The Mk2 had a 4 to 5 second fuse. At 4 meters, the fragments would kill everyone behind that wall, but the explosion would alert the other 2 gun crews upslope. Crawford would have maybe 10 seconds before they opened fire on his position. 10 seconds to locate the second gun, reach cover, and start the process again. He pulled the pin, let the spoon fly with its distinctive metallic ping, counted 2 seconds while the fuse burned, threw the grenade over the wall. It landed behind the machine gun with a sound like metal striking stone. One German voice shouted something sharp and urgent. Then the grenade detonated. The explosion was a pressure wave and a sound like the sky tearing. Dirt and fragments blew outward. Crawford saw one German soldier thrown backward, arms loose, already dead. Crawford didn't wait to confirm the others. He was already moving right, paralleling the terrace wall, heading for an outcrop of rocks 15 meters away. He reached it 3 seconds before the second machine gun opened fire. The rounds hit the terrace wall where Crawford had been lying, chipping stone, sending fragments spinning through the darkness. Crawford pressed himself into the rocks and listened. The second gun was firing from upslope and to the left, maybe 60 meters. The sound echoed off the hillside, making precise location difficult. But Crawford didn't need precision yet. He needed direction and distance. He had both. The sky was turning grey. Dawn would arrive in 20 minutes. After that, concealment would become impossible. German observers on the crest would see him moving and direct fire onto his position. Crawford had to finish before first light. He began climbing. The hillside was a topographic nightmare. Stone terraces every 10 to 15 meters, each one a meter high, built to catch rainfall and create level planting surfaces on the steep volcanic slope. Crawford used them like a deer used terrain, staying in the dead ground, moving when the angle masked him, always keeping some piece of earth between himself and the guns above. The second machine gun fired in long bursts now, 20 to 30 rounds, sweeping the lower slopes where Company I was still pinned down 200 meters below. The crew hadn't seen Crawford yet. They were firing at muzzle flashes from American rifles, engaging known positions. Crawford climbed through the terrace system, pulling himself over each stone wall with his elbows, crawling across the narrow dirt strips behind them. The volcanic soil was loose here, a mixture of weathered stone and organic matter that smelled like iron. Every movement produced small scraping sounds, gravel shifting beneath his weight. He moved during the machine gun bursts, when the sound of firing covered the noise of his approach, froze during the silences, patient. At 05:52 hours, Crawford reached a position 40 meters below the second gun. He could see it now, a depression gouged into the hillside, sandbags piled around the front and sides, 2 men visible. The gun was oriented downslope, covering the American positions. The crew's backs were to Crawford. They hadn't seen him. They were still focused on the valley below, still engaging targets that fired back, never imagining someone was climbing toward them through the dead ground. Crawford estimated the distance at 35 meters. Too far for an accurate grenade throw. He would have to get closer. He left the rocks and began crawling across open ground, angling upslope toward a cluster of olive trees 20 meters from the gun position. The earth was loose volcanic soil mixed with gravel. Every movement produced sound, small scrapes and shifts that seemed deafening in the pre-dawn quiet. But the machine gun fired again, and the sound covered Crawford's approach. He moved during the bursts, froze during reload. The German crew remained focused downslope, professional and disciplined, doing their job with German efficiency. Crawford reached the olive trees at 05:57 hours. Ancient trees, trunks thick and gnarled, branches spreading low. Someone had planted these 300 years ago. They'd survived other wars. From the trees, Crawford could see the third machine gun position. It was 50 meters upslope from the second, dug into the base of a rock formation near the crest. The third gun wasn't firing. The crew was waiting, probably under orders to conserve ammunition and provide overwatch while the other guns engaged targets. Crawford understood the tactic immediately. The third gun was insurance, positioned to cover the other 2 if they were attacked. If Crawford destroyed the second gun, the third gun would kill him before he could reach cover. He needed to neutralize both guns, but he only had 2 grenades left, and the positions were 50 meters apart. He couldn't throw a grenade that far. He couldn't approach both simultaneously. He needed to change the tactical problem. Crawford pulled his second grenade and stared at it, thinking through the geometry. 2 guns, 50 meters separation, interlocking fields of fire. Professional crews who would react instantly to threats. The mathematics didn't work. Not with grenades, not with direct assault. He needed deception. Crawford looked around the olive tree. The ground was littered with debris from the fighting, spent shell casings, broken equipment, fragments of stone blown loose by mortar fire. And there, half buried in volcanic soil, a piece of wood. Splintered branch from a shell-damaged tree, maybe 1.5 meters long. Crawford pulled it free and examined it. Straight, solid, light enough to hold steady, but strong enough not to break. He removed his knit cap and placed it on the branch's split end, wedged it tight. The cap looked pathetic, a dark blob on a stick, barely resembling anything human. But Crawford wasn't trying to fool human eyes at close range. He was trying to fool human instincts at 60 meters in bad light, make them see movement and react before thinking. He positioned himself at the left edge of the olive tree, keeping his body behind the trunk, extending only his right arm. The The branch rose slowly above the tree line, the knit cap silhouetted against the grey sky. The second machine gun opened fire immediately. 40 rounds, maybe more, the gunner traversing left to right across the tree's position. Crawford felt the impacts through the ground, branches exploding overhead, wood fragments raining down. The cap took multiple hits and fell off the stick. When the firing stopped, Crawford counted. 8 seconds of sustained fire, 12 seconds of silence, reload or barrel change. 18 seconds total, the same rhythm as before. He'd confirmed 2 things. First, the Germans would shoot at movement without confirming the threat. Second, their reload cycle was predictable. Crawford looked at the stick in his hand, then at the ground around him. He needed something more visible than a knit cap, something that would draw sustained fire, make them commit ammunition, make them believe they'd killed their target. He found it 30 seconds later. When Crawford had thrown his first grenade at the first machine gun position, he'd killed 3 Germans. One of them had been wearing a Stahlhelm, the distinctive German steel helmet with its coal scuttle profile and rolled rim. Crawford had passed that position on his way upslope. The helmet was still there, lying in the dirt beside the dead soldier who'd worn it. Crawford crawled back down to the first position, retrieved the helmet and returned to the olive trees. The detour cost him 4 minutes, but time wasn't the constraint anymore. Visibility was. The sky was getting lighter, maybe 15 minutes until full dawn. He mounted the Stahlhelm on a longer stick he'd found, 2 meters of solid wood, probably a broken sapling. The helmet fit perfectly on the split end, secured by friction and gravity. Crawford raised the helmet above the rocks, slower this time, letting it rise like a soldier carefully checking the terrain. The second machine gun fired instantly. 50+ rounds, a sustained burst that shredded the helmet's position. Crawford heard the distinctive tang of bullets striking steel. The helmet took at least 3 direct hits but stayed on the stick. When the firing stopped, Crawford lowered the stick and examined the helmet. 3 holes punched through the crown. The Germans had hit center mass. If that had been Crawford's actual head, he'd be dead. Instead, he was alive and had confirmed the second gun's exact position. More importantly, he discovered something tactical. The Germans would shoot at a helmet on a stick. They would commit ammunition to a target that was nothing but deception. They would react faster than they could think. Crawford pulled his second grenade and began moving. The approach to the second machine gun took 11 minutes. Crawford used the terrain, crawled during their firing bursts, froze during reloads. At 05:58 hours, he was 20 meters from their position, concealed behind a stone terrace, close enough to hear them talking. One voice was young, nervous. The other was older, calm, giving instructions. A veteran and a replacement, maybe. The older German was teaching the younger one, explaining fields of fire and ammunition conservation. Crawford almost felt bad about what he was about to do. Almost. He pulled the grenade pin, counted 2 seconds, threw. The grenade flew in a low arc and landed 3 meters short of the position, striking volcanic rock. The explosion blew dirt and fragments forward into the sandbag war. Crawford saw one German soldier thrown backward. The second soldier dropped behind cover, whether hit or seeking protection, Crawford couldn't tell. Then Crawford was running upslope, boots digging into loose soil, lungs already burning. Behind him, the second position was silent. Ahead and above, the third machine gun opened fire. The rounds hit the ground where Crawford had been standing 2 seconds earlier. He dove forward, rolled behind a boulder the size of a truck, pressed himself flat. The third gun kept firing, long bursts, 60+ rounds, the gunner suppressing the area where Crawford had disappeared. The bullets chewed through volcanic rock like it was soft wood, sending fragments spinning overhead. Crawford lay still and thought about the geometry. He was 25 meters from the third position, maybe 30. Close enough to use the rifle, except the gun was dug in behind sandbags with overhead cover. Rifle rounds wouldn't penetrate. He needed the crew to leave the position, come to him, make themselves vulnerable. He needed the helmet trick again. Crawford found another stick, shorter this time, maybe a meter, but it would work. He wedged the German Stahlhelm, now with 3 bullet holes through the crown, onto the split end. He raised it slowly above the boulder. The third machine gun fired immediately. The helmet took more hits, the bullets punching through already damaged steel. Crawford counted the rounds. 60, 70. The gunner was burning through his ammunition belt, making absolutely sure of the kill. When the firing stopped, Crawford let the stick fall. The helmet clattered onto the rocks behind the boulder, visible from the gun position, no longer moving. He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Then he heard it. Boots on rock. Someone approaching from the gun position, moving carefully, weapon ready. The German was coming to verify his kill, to check the body, to make sure the American was actually dead. Crawford shifted his weight, bringing the M1 Garand around from his back. He kept the movement minimal, just enough to get the rifle into position. 8 rounds of .30-06 Springfield, effective range over 500 meters. Current target distance, less than 15. A German soldier appeared at the right edge of the boulder, young, maybe 20, field grey uniform, Kar 98K rifle at low ready. His eyes went to the fallen helmet first, searching for the body that should be attached. Crawford shot him through the head. The Garand's report echoed across the hillside. The German dropped instantly. Crawford was already moving, shifting to the opposite side of the boulder, anticipating reaction from the gun position. Another German appeared at the left side of the third position, head and shoulders visible above the sandbags, scanning for the rifle shot's source. Crawford fired. The soldier fell back. The machine gun opened fire again, wild and undisciplined, the gunner unable to see his target but firing anyway. Crawford rolled left, found new cover 5 meters away. The MG34 kept firing, achieving nothing. When the gun went silent for reload, Crawford heard voices. Urgent German, 2 men shouting coordinates or instructions. Then boots on rock. They were abandoning the position, trying to flank, attempting to get an angle on Crawford's location. Sound tactics. But Crawford had been hunting animals that could smell fear at 200 meters and hear a rifle bolt at half a mile. 2 German soldiers moving through rocks sounded like a freight train. He let them come. They appeared through a gap in the terrain 15 meters away, 2 soldiers in field grey, rifles raised, moving in a tactical wedge. Crawford rose and fired 4 rounds in 2 seconds. Both Germans went down. The M1 Garand's on-block clip ejected with its distinctive ping. Crawford dropped behind cover, pulled a fresh clip from his belt, reloaded. 8 rounds loaded and chambered in under 3 seconds. He waited, listening. No more movement, no more voices. Crawford moved forward in a low crouch, rifle ready, and reached the third machine gun position. Empty. 4-man crew, 2 dead from rifle fire, 2 fled upslope toward German lines. The MG34 sat unmanned, barrel still warm, ammunition belt half-loaded. Crawford turned and looked downslope. Company I was advancing, soldiers moving through the positions he'd cleared. He could see Lieutenant Garris near the front, directing movement with hand signals. Crawford checked his watch. 06:15 hours. He'd started at 05:23, 51 minutes. 3 machine gun positions destroyed. Approximately 9 to 12 Germans killed. 0 American casualties during his assault. Crawford sat down heavily and realized his hands were shaking. 06:15 to 06:35. Hours, September 13th, 1943. Lieutenant Nathaniel Garris reached the 3rd machine gun position at 06:22 hours, breathing hard from the climb, his Thompson submachine gun sweeping left and right for threats. He found Crawford sitting behind the sandbag wall, reloading rifle clips with ammunition scavenged from German ammunition boxes. Crawford looked up. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat. His uniform was torn at both knees. His hands were steady now, the shaking gone, replaced by the methodical movements of a man performing a familiar task. "Sir." Garris stared at the MG34 position, then at the 2 German bodies lying 15 meters away, then back at Crawford. "Did you do this alone?" "Yes, sir." "All 3 positions?" "Yes, sir." Garris sat down heavily on the sandbag wall. He pulled a canteen from his belt and drank, then offered it to Crawford. Crawford took it and drank deeply. The water was warm and tasted like metal, but it was the best thing he'd tasted in hours. "I told you to stay in the goddamn hole," Garrus said. "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." Garrus was quiet for a moment. Behind them, Company I was consolidating on the crest, establishing defensive positions, preparing for the German counterattack that everyone knew was coming. Sergeant Ashford was organizing the second platoon, shouting orders, getting men into fighting positions. "How did you do it?" Garrus asked. Crawford explained the helmet trick, the German Stahlhelm mounted on a stick, raising it to draw fire, using the muzzle flash to locate positions, making the Germans waste ammunition on a deception while he moved through their blind spots. Garrus listened without interrupting. When Crawford finished, the lieutenant was quiet for a long moment. "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard," Garrus said finally. "It worked, sir." "It worked," Garrus agreed. He stood up and extended his hand. "I'm recommending you for the Medal of Honor. Sergeant Ashford is co-signing the recommendation." Crawford didn't know what to say to that. The Medal of Honor was for men who did extraordinary things, heroic things. Crawford had just done what needed doing, using skills his father had taught him hunting deer in Colorado mountains. "Sir, Crawford, you single-handedly neutralized 3 enemy machine gun positions in under an hour. You enabled this entire company to advance with 0 casualties during your assault. You saved lives. That's worth recognition." "The men who died last night trying to take this hill," Crawford said quietly. "They followed orders. They charged straight up into machine gun fire, knowing they'd probably die. That's heroic. I disobeyed orders and went alone. If I'd failed, only I would have died. That's still heroic." "No, sir. That's just practical." Garrus looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Get some rest, Crawford. We're going to need everyone when the Germans counterattack." Crawford stood and moved to a position along the crest, found a good spot between 2 rocks that offered cover and a clear field of fire down the northern slope. He lay prone, rifle ready, and waited. 06:35. Hours. The German counterattack came exactly as expected, infantry supported by armor advancing from the North Valley in a coordinated assault. Crawford counted 3 Panzer IV tanks and 2 Stug 3 assault guns, with infantry following in loose formation. Company 1 opened fire. The crest erupted in rifle shots and machine gun bursts. The Americans had brought their own .30 caliber machine guns forward, establishing overlapping fields of fire across the approach routes. Crawford fired methodically, working the M1 Garand's trigger smooth and steady, picking targets at the edge of the German advance. Soldiers trying to flank, soldiers exposing themselves to direct infantry. He dropped 3 Germans in quick succession, each shot carefully aimed, each shot a kill. The battle developed into a grinding exchange. The Germans couldn't advance without casualties. The Americans couldn't retreat without abandoning the high ground they'd just taken. It was war reduced to its simplest mathematics. Whoever could sustain losses longer would win. Crawford reloaded, chambered a round, and continued firing. His shoulder ached from the Garand's recoil. His ears rang from the sustained noise. But his hands were steady, and his breathing was controlled, and he killed Germans with the same methodical patience he'd used hunting deer. At 06:42 hours, Crawford saw the wounded soldier. Private Daniel Miller, 2nd Squad, Company I. Crawford didn't know him well. They'd shipped over on the same transport, but had barely spoken. Miller was lying in the open 30 meters north of the American lines, both legs hit, unable to move. He must have been wounded early in the counterattack, tried to crawl back to friendly lines, lost strength part way. Now he was exposed, no cover, Germans advancing toward his position. Miller saw Crawford looking and raised one hand, not waving, just acknowledging. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He knew what was coming. Crawford made his decision in less than a second. He stood up, slung his rifle across his back, and ran toward Miller. Sergeant Ashford shouted something. Crawford didn't hear it over the gunfire. He was focused on Miller, on covering 30 meters before the Germans saw him, before someone with a clear line of sight put a bullet through his back. He reached Miller in 8 seconds. The private had been hit twice in the left leg, once in the right. Bone was visible through torn fabric. Blood pooled beneath him, dark against volcanic soil. "I've got you," Crawford said. He grabbed Miller under the arms and began dragging him backward toward the American lines. Miller screamed. The movement ground bone fragments together, fired every nerve ending at once. Crawford kept dragging. 20 meters to safety. 15. Then he heard German voices. Close. Too close. Crawford turned his head and saw the patrol. 6 German soldiers, flanking right around the American position, using dead ground that Crawford himself had used during his morning infiltration. They'd been invisible to defenders on the crest. Now they were 10 meters away, rifles raised, moving directly toward Crawford and Miller. The lead German, a corporal by his insignia, shouted a command. Crawford didn't speak German, but he understood the tone. "Stop. Drop your weapon. Hands up." Crawford looked at Miller, then at the German patrol, then back at the American lines. 15 meters. Might as well have been 15 miles. He let go of Miller and raised his hands. The Germans took Crawford's rifle first, the M1 Garand that had killed 9 Germans in the past hour. A German corporal examined it with professional interest, worked the action, checked the chamber. He said something in German that sounded approving. They took his ammunition, his canteen, his knife, his identification tags, everything that identified him as PFC Elijah Crawford, serial number 37458291, blood type O, Protestant. The corporal spoke English, heavily accented but functional. "You are very brave," he said, "or very foolish." Crawford looked at Miller, who was trying to stay conscious. "Just doing my job." "Your job was to get killed." "My job was to get him home." The corporal considered this, then nodded to one of his men. The German soldier, a medic, judging by the Red Cross armband, moved to Miller and began treating his wounds. The corporal looked back at Crawford. "He will receive medical attention. You have my word as a German officer." "Thank you." They bound Crawford's hands with wire and began marching him north, away from Hill 424, away from Company I, away from the battle he'd spent 51 minutes winning. Behind him, Crawford heard the firefight continue, American voices shouting orders, machine gun fire, the crump of mortars. Company I was still holding. The hill he'd cleared would remain in American hands. The corporal walked beside Crawford, one hand on the captured M1 Garand. "What is your name?" "Crawford, PFC. Serial number 37458291. I am Corporal Wilhelm Strasser, 16th Panzer Grenadier Division. I will process your capture personally. You will be treated according to Geneva Convention." He paused. "You killed many of my comrades this morning." "Yes." "How many?" Crawford thought about the question. 3 at the first position, 1 or 2 at the second. He hadn't confirmed the kills. 4 at the third. 9 confirmed, possibly more. Strasser nodded slowly. "We've found the positions. The machine guns destroyed. Professional work." He looked at Crawford with something like respect. "You did this alone?" "Yes." "How?" Crawford explained the helmet trick again. Strasser listened carefully, asked questions about timing and angles and ammunition expenditure. When Crawford finished, the corporal was quiet for several minutes. "That is very clever," Strasser said finally. "Simple but effective, the kind of innovation that wins wars." They walked in silence after that, following a goat trail down the northern slope of Hill 424. The sounds of battle faded behind them. Ahead, somewhere in the valley, was a German command post, then a prisoner collection point, then a truck that would take Crawford to Italy, then a ship to Germany, then Stalag 7A. Crawford didn't know any of that yet. He only knew that he'd done what needed doing. 3 machine gun positions in 51 minutes. Company I held for high ground. Private Miller would receive medical attention. The rest was out of Crawford's hands. At 0710 hours, they reached a German defensive position dug into the hillside. Other prisoners were there, Americans from Company I, captured during the counterattack. Maybe a dozen men, sitting with hands bound, guarded by German soldiers. Strasser pushed Crawford toward them gently. "Sit. Wait for transport." Crawford sat. His wrists ached where the wire cut into skin. One of the American prisoners recognized him. "Crawford, Jesus Christ, they got you too." "They got me. We heard you took out 3 machine guns by yourself. That true?" Crawford nodded. "How?" "Helmet on a stick. Made them shoot at it. Located positions from muzzle flash." The prisoner stared. "That actually worked?" "3 times. Holy shit." The sun climbed higher. The morning warmed. German trucks arrived to transport the prisoners north. Crawford climbed into the back of an Opel Blitz, sat on the wooden bench, felt the engine start and the wheels begin turning. Through the canvas cover, he caught one last glimpse of Hill 424. Company I was still there, still holding the crest, still defending the position that Crawford's 51 minutes had secured. It was enough. The truck drove north, and Elijah Crawford disappeared into captivity, carrying with him the memory of 3 German helmets, silhouetted against a grey morning sky. Stalag 7, A, Moosburg, Bavaria, Germany, November 1944, 14 months after capture. The wood scrap was birch, maybe 8 inches long and 4 inches wide, salvaged from a broken packing crate that had held Red Cross parcels 2 weeks ago. Elijah Crawford turned it over in his hands, examining the grain. Good wood. Tight growth rings, indicating slow growth in harsh conditions. It would hold charcoal writing without splintering. He sat in the corner of Barracks 17, Block C, his back against the thin wooden wall that separated the sleeping quarters from the latrine. The wall was cold. Everything in Stalag 7A was cold in November. The barracks were unheated except for a single potbelly stove that 48 men crowded around each evening, burning whatever scraps of wood they could scavenge from around the compound. Crawford didn't crowd around the stove. He stayed in his corner with his wood scraps and his charcoal pieces pulled from the stove's ash pan when no one was looking. The other prisoners thought he was writing letters home, or keeping a journal of captivity, or documenting German war crimes for future prosecution. They were wrong. Crawford was writing about deer hunting. He held a charcoal piece like a pencil, gripping it gently so it wouldn't crumble, and began writing in small, careful letters across the birch scrap's smooth surface. November in San Isabel. First snow usually comes 3rd week. Bucks move to lower elevation following does into winter range. Best hunting 6,000 to 7,000 feet, where the transition zone provides both food and cover. Morning thermals rise up canyon, approach from downwind always, move slow. Father always said patience kills, not speed. He paused, examining his handwriting. The charcoal smudged easily. He'd have to be careful not to touch the words, or they'd blur into illegibility. When the scrap was full, he'd store it with the others under his bunk, wrapped in a piece of cloth torn from his spare shirt. The shirt he'd stopped wearing 2 months ago when it had become too threadbare to provide any warmth. "Crawford." He looked up. Corporal Michael Brennan stood over him, holding a tin cup of whatever passed for coffee in the camp. Roasted grain, maybe acorns, definitely not actual coffee. Brennan was from Boston, captured at Anzio in May 1944, 31 years old. Good soldier, kept his mouth shut and didn't complain, which made him one of the better men to be imprisoned with. "Yeah? You writing again?" "Yeah." Brennan sat down beside him, uninvited, but Crawford didn't mind. The barracks were too crowded for privacy anyway. 48 men in a space designed for 24. "What are you writing about?" "Hunting." "Hunting what?" "Mule deer. In the mountains back home." Brennan sipped his not coffee and made a face. "You've been writing about hunting for 6 months straight. Every single day. Don't you want to write about something else? About getting out of here? About what you'll do when the war ends?" Crawford looked at the birch scrap, at the words describing November snow and thermal winds, and the patience required to kill cleanly. "This is what I'll do when the war ends. Go back to those mountains. Hunt the way my father taught me. The war will end someday. The mountains won't change." "What if you forget? What if you get home and can't remember how to hunt anymore?" "I won't forget. but writing it down helps me remember who I was before I became prisoner 84736. Crawford set down his charcoal piece carefully. The camp wants us to forget who we were, wants us to become just numbers, just bodies waiting to die. Writing about hunting reminds me I had a life before this. I'll have a life after this. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Around them, the barracks filled with the sounds of men trying to stay warm and sane. Someone was singing quietly in German, a prisoner who'd grown up in a German-speaking household and still remembered the songs. Someone else was arguing about baseball statistics from 1941, insisting that Ted Williams had hit .406 that season, not .403. Normal sounds, human sounds, the sounds of men refusing to give up. "They're saying the war will be over by spring," Brennan said. "Russians are pushing from the east. We're pushing from the west. Germany's getting squeezed. Can't last much longer." "Maybe." "You don't think so?" Crawford picked up his charcoal again and continued writing on the birch scrap. "I think wars end when they end. Predicting doesn't change anything. Better to focus on what you can control, like remembering what matters." "And hunting matters?" "Hunting is about more than killing deer." Crawford didn't look up from his writing. "It's about understanding the mountain, reading weather patterns, moving quietly through terrain, respecting what you take. My father taught me all of that. If I forget hunting, I forget him. I forget the best parts of who I was." Brennan stood up, cup in hand. "You're a strange man, Crawford." "I know." After Brennan left, Crawford returned to his writing. He filled the birch scrap with details about tracking in fresh snow, about reading deer sign, about the difference between fresh scat and old scat, about wind direction and scent control. Technical information that had nothing to do with machine guns or grenades, or the 51 minutes that had earned him a Medal of Honor he didn't know existed. When the scrap was full, he set it aside to dry and pulled another from his small collection hidden under the bunk. This one was pine, softer wood, harder to write on without gouging the surface. He started writing anyway, pressing gently with the charcoal. "Shot placement for mule deer. Aim for front shoulder, heart-lung area. High shoulder shot drops them instantly, but damages more meat. Neck shot is risky, small target, high chance of wounding. Father's rule. If you can't make a clean kill, don't take the shot. The animal deserves that respect. We're taking its life to sustain ours. That's a contract. Honor it." The barracks lights dimmed at 2100 hours, part of the camp's energy conservation, though Crawford suspected it was more about controlling the prisoners than saving electricity. He wrapped his wood scraps carefully in the cloth and slid them under his bunk, next to 47 other scraps he'd written over the past 14 months. None of them mentioned Altavilla. None mentioned the helmet trick. None mentioned the war at all. Just hunting, just mountains. Just the lessons his father had taught him about patience and respect and clean kills. Crawford lay on his bunk, wooden slats with a thin straw mattress that provided almost no cushioning, and stared at the ceiling. The tuberculosis in his lungs was getting worse. He could feel it now, a constant ache in his chest, a wheeze when he breathed deeply, occasional flecks of blood when he coughed in the mornings. The camp doctor, a German physician named Dr. Eichenwald, who did his best with no supplies and too many patients, had diagnosed it 3 months ago during a routine sick call. "Pulmonary tuberculosis," Dr. Eichenwald had said in careful English. "Very common in camps, poor nutrition, close quarters, weakened immune systems from chronic stress. I can do nothing except recommend you get as much food as possible and avoid heavy physical labor." Crawford had thanked him and left. There was no treatment available. Antibiotics that could fight tuberculosis existed. Streptomycin had been discovered in 1943, but they weren't available to POWs in German camps. You either survived tuberculosis or you didn't. The bacteria would do what bacteria did, multiplying in lung tissue, creating cavities and scar tissue, making it progressively harder to breathe. Crawford thought about the San Isabel National Forest, about air so cold and clean it hurt to breathe on winter mornings, about hunting at 7,000 feet elevation, where the air was thin and your breath came out in white clouds. About the silence after fresh snowfall, when the world seemed to hold its breath. He would hunt those mountains again. The war would end. The Germans would lose, that much was obvious now, even to the most optimistic Nazi. When Germany surrendered, the camps would be liberated, prisoners would be repatriated, and Crawford would go home. The tuberculosis might kill him eventually, but not before he made one more hunting season in the high country, tracking mule deer through aspen groves turned gold by autumn frost. That was enough. One more season, one more clean kill, one more chance to honor his father's teachings. Crawford closed his eyes and let sleep take him, dreaming of mountains far from Bavaria, far from war, far from everything except wind and silence and the patient work of the hunter. April 29th, 1945, Liberation Day. The American tanks arrived at 10:35 hours on a Sunday morning. Crawford heard them before he saw them, the distinctive rumble of Sherman engines, the squeal of tracks on pavement, the deep mechanical roar of American power rolling through Bavaria like a force of nature. The German guards had fled during the night. The prisoners had woken at dawn to find the guard towers empty, the gates unlocked, the compound abandoned. No Germans, no orders, no structure. For the first hour, no one had left. Where would they go? They were deep in Bavaria, surrounded by German territory that might or might not still be hostile, weakened by months or years of malnutrition and disease. Better to wait for liberation than wander into the chaos of a collapsing Germany. So they'd waited, and at 10:35 hours, the 14th Armored Division rolled through the main gate of Stalag 7A like liberating angels in steel vehicles. Crawford watched from the barracks doorway as American soldiers dismounted from their tanks and trucks. Young men, well-fed, healthy, wearing clean uniforms and carrying enough ammunition and equipment to fight a small war. They looked at the prisoners with expressions Crawford recognized from hunting, the way you looked at an animal caught in a trap for too long, injured and suffering but still alive, and you had to decide whether to end its misery or try to save it. These soldiers would try to save them. That's what Americans did. A captain approached Barrack 17, moving carefully, speaking gently, the way you'd approach wounded animals that might panic. "You men, American?" Heads nodded. Voices confirmed. Yes, American. Company I, 142nd Infantry, 1st Armored Division, 3rd Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne. Units from across the European theatre, all of them ending up here in Stalag 7A. "Medical teams are setting up in the parade ground," the captain said. "Everyone needs to be examined and documented. We'll get you processed for repatriation as fast as possible." "How many men in this barracks?" 48, Brennan answered. 6 died over the winter, dysentery, pneumonia, 1 from beating by guards. The captain's jaw tightened. He made a note on a clipboard. "Understood. Form up outside when you're ready. No rush. Take your time." Crawford walked outside with the others. The sunlight hurt his eyes after months of dim barracks lighting. He'd lost 32 pounds since capture, dropping from 165 to 133. The tuberculosis had carved out sections of his lungs, leaving scar tissue and reduced breathing capacity. Every breath required conscious effort. A medic examined him in a tent erected beside the parade ground. Young soldier, maybe 23, with a stethoscope and earnest eyes that had probably seen too much death in the past year. "Deep breath," the medic said. Crawford breathed. The wheeze was audible even without amplification. "Again." Crawford breathed again. The medic's expression darkened with professional concern. "How long have you been coughing?" 8 months, maybe longer. "Blood in the sputum?" "Sometimes, usually mornings." "Night sweats?" "Every night." The medic made notes on a form attached to a clipboard. "Probable advanced tuberculosis. You'll need chest x-rays and extended treatment. I'm marking you for immediate hospital transfer and priority medical care." "How long will treatment take?" "Could be months. TB doesn't clear up quickly, especially with the damage I'm hearing in your lungs." The medic looked up from his clipboard. "You might not be going home as fast as you'd like. The disease needs to be treated before you can travel or be around other people." Crawford nodded slowly. Months in a hospital. That meant summer 1945 at minimum, autumn if the treatment took longer. The 1945 hunting season in San Isabel would start in October. He might miss it entirely. "Name and unit," the medic asked, pen ready. "Crawford, Elijah, Private First Class, serial number 374589291, Company I, 142nd Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division." The medic wrote it down, then paused. He looked up at Crawford with a strange expression. "Crawford from Company 1. Were you at Altavilla?" Crawford felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Yes, September 1943. Were you the one who took out the machine gun positions? The helmet trick?" "Yes." The medic stared at him for 3 full seconds. "They gave you the Medal of Honor. You're famous." Crawford's world tilted slightly. "I'm what?" "Medal of Honor, for single-handedly neutralizing 3 enemy machine gun positions under fire. It was in Stars and Stripes last year. Big article. They said you were killed in action right after. Your family received the medal in a ceremony." Crawford sat down heavily on the examination table. "I didn't die." "Obviously." The medic was still staring. "But the paperwork said you were MIA, presumed dead. When did you get captured?" "Same day as the assault, September 13th, 1943, right after securing Hill 424. I tried to rescue a wounded man from my squad. German patrol intercepted us." "Jesus Christ." The medic set down his clipboard. "You've been listed as dead for 20 months. Your family thinks you're gone. The Medal of Honor was awarded posthumously to your father in Pueblo, Colorado in May 1944. Crawford thought about his father receiving the medal at a ceremony in Pueblo, thought about the telegram that would have arrived first. "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that Private First Class Elijah Crawford was killed in action." Thought about his mother crying, his father standing at attention while some colonel read a citation and placed a medal in his hands. "Don't correct it," Crawford said quietly. The medic blinked. "What?" "Don't correct the records, leave them as they are." "But you're alive. Your family needs to know." "That medal was given to a soldier who died at Altavilla." Crawford met the medic's eyes. "I'm not that soldier anymore. Let him keep the medal. Let my family keep their memory of him." The medic looked like he wanted to argue, saw something in Crawford's expression that stopped him. That's not my decision to make. The Army will sort this out when they process your repatriation. They'll contact your family, correct the records." "Sure," Crawford said. "They'll sort it out." But he knew they wouldn't. The Army was processing millions of soldiers right now. Casualties, prisoners, displaced persons, liberated camps. Bureaucratic chaos. A single POW whose records said he was dead would slip through the cracks unless someone specifically looked for the discrepancy and decided to fix it. If Crawford didn't push the issue, if he just went through the system quietly, accepted his treatment, went home without making waves, the error would persist. The Army would continue believing that Private First Class Elijah Crawford had been killed in action at Altavilla on September 13th, 1943. And maybe that was better. The soldier who had crawled up Hill 424 and killed 9 Germans with 3 grenades and a rifle had died there. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. That soldier had been 28 years old, healthy, capable of extraordinary violence when necessary. The man sitting in this medical tent was 30 years old, ravaged by tuberculosis, carrying 20 months of starvation and disease and psychological trauma. Different person, different life. Maybe the Army's paperwork was accidentally correct. The soldier had died. Someone else was going home. Crawford stood up from the examination table. "When do I get transported to the hospital?" "Transport convoy leaves tomorrow morning, 0800 hours. The medic was still looking at him strangely. "Are you sure about not correcting the records? Your family—" "I'm sure." The medic made one final note on his clipboard and let Crawford go. Crawford walked back to Barracks 17, gathered his few possessions, the wood scraps with hunting notes wrapped carefully in cloth, a spare set of clothes that were more holes than fabric, his dog tags, and prepared for the next phase of his journey home. 20 months as a prisoner of war, 51 minutes as a hero, the rest of his life trying to figure out which one defined him. Pueblo, Colorado, October 1945, 5 months after liberation. The house looked exactly as Crawford remembered it. Small, single-story structure, white paint peeling on the south side where the sun hit hardest. The front porch where he'd sat with his father on summer evenings, cleaning rifles and talking about the mountains. The garden his mother tended, now showing signs of autumn decline, dried stalks and empty beds waiting for winter. Crawford stood on the sidewalk for 5 minutes before walking up the path. His duffel bag sat at his feet, containing everything he owned. 3 changes of clothes, his discharge papers, a collection of wood scraps wrapped in cloth and covered in charcoal writing about deer hunting. The front door opened. His father stood there, older than Crawford remembered, greyer, thinner, moving slower. For 3 seconds they just looked at each other across the distance. Then his father's face crumpled and he came down the steps faster than a 73-year-old man should move. They embraced on the front walk. His father smelled like tobacco and coffee and gun oil, exactly the same as Crawford remembered. Crawford realized he was crying. They both were. "They said you were dead," his father managed to say into Crawford's shoulder. 2 years. The telegram said killed in action. We had a ceremony. The medal. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't." His father pulled back, gripping Crawford's shoulders with hands that were still strong despite age. "Don't apologize for surviving. Don't ever apologize for that. Come inside. Your mother's been cooking since we got word you were coming home." The house interior was the same furniture, same photographs on the walls, but there was something new on the mantel above the fireplace, a frame holding a Medal of Honor and a citation signed by President Franklin Roosevelt. Crawford stopped in front of it and read the citation. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Private First Class Elijah Crawford, Company I, 142nd Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division, on September 13, 1943, near Altavilla, Italy, single-handedly attacked and destroyed 3 enemy machine gun positions, enabling his company to advance with minimal casualties. Despite intense enemy fire, Private Crawford used improvised tactics and exceptional courage to neutralize fortified positions, killing 9 enemy soldiers and securing strategic terrain. His actions exemplified the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Army. "We had a ceremony in May 1944, his father said quietly, standing beside Crawford. "The mayor came, half the town. They gave me the medal and said you died a hero in Italy, said you saved your whole company." "I did die," Crawford said softly. "That man died at Altavilla. What came back is someone different." His father looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, his thinned frame, the way he breathed with conscious effort. "The tuberculosis? How did you know?" "I can hear it when you breathe, and you're too thin." "The discharge papers mentioned extended medical treatment?" 3 months in a military hospital. New drug called streptomycin, supposed to kill the bacteria." Crawford turned away from the medal. "It helped enough. I'm alive. The bacteria are still there, probably always will be, but I can function. I can work. Can you hunt?" Crawford looked at his father, surprised by the question. "That's the first thing you ask?" "It's the thing that matters." His father's voice was firm. "Can you walk the high country? Can you climb to 7,000 feet? Can you hold a rifle steady? Can you track and shoot and field dress a deer?" Crawford thought about it honestly. His lungs were damaged. He couldn't run without coughing. Steep climbs left him winded. But walking slowly, pacing himself, resting when needed, that was possible. "Yes," he said, "I can hunt." His father nodded once. "Then you didn't lose what matters. Everything else we can figure out as we go." January 13th, 1946, 3 months later. Helen Whitaker worked the night shift at Parkview Hospital in Pueblo, tending to patients in the tuberculosis ward. The work was difficult. TB patients required careful isolation protocols, monitoring for complications, emotional support through months of treatment that might or might not succeed. She'd been a nurse since 1941, joined the Army Nurse Corps in 1942, served in North Africa and Italy until 1944, when a jeep accident broke her left leg in 3 places and sent her home on medical discharge. Now she was 27 years old, back in Pueblo, trying to build a civilian life from the pieces of her military service. Elijah Crawford had been admitted to the TB ward in November for a follow-up treatment series after his initial therapy at the military hospital. Helen had been assigned to his care. She'd figured out within the first week that Crawford wasn't like other patients. Most TB patients talked constantly about their families, their jobs before the war, their plans for after treatment. Crawford barely spoke. When he did, it was usually to ask for paper and pencil so he could write. She'd looked at his writing once, expecting letters to family. Instead, she found detailed technical notes about deer hunting, paragraphs about tracking techniques, diagrams of shot placement and bullet trajectory, descriptions of mountain terrain and weather patterns, and the behavior of mule deer in different seasons. "You really like hunting," she'd said. "It's what I know." "What about before the war? What did you do?" "Hunted. Worked odd jobs when I needed money. Hunted some more." "And during the war?" Crawford had gone quiet at that question, the way he always went quiet when anyone asked about combat. Finally, "I was in Italy with the 36th Division." "What unit?" 142nd Infantry, Company I. Helen had nodded, not pushing. A lot of veterans didn't want to talk about the war. That was normal, even expected. What wasn't normal was the way Crawford wrote obsessively about hunting, like he was documenting everything he knew before he forgot it. One night in December, during her rounds at 0200 hours, she'd found him sitting up in bed writing by the dim nightlight, his breathing labored from the effort of staying awake. "Can't sleep?" she'd asked. "Never sleep much." He'd set down his pencil. "The ward's too quiet. Makes me nervous." "You prefer noise?" "I prefer wind in trees, creek water running over rocks, the sound of aspen leaves moving. Real silence, not building silence." Helen had sat down in the chair beside his bed. "Where do you hunt?" "San Isabel National Forest, west of Pueblo. Mountains running up to 13,000 feet at the peaks. Mule deer mostly, though there are elk if you go high enough." "Your family hunts?" "My father taught me. His father taught him. Goes back generations in our family." "What happens when you can't hunt anymore? When you're too old, or the tuberculosis gets worse?" Crawford had looked at her with an expression that seemed both sad and determined. "Then I'll have written it all down. Someone else can learn from it. That's why I write. Not for me, for whoever comes after, whoever needs to know how it's done properly." They'd talked until 0300 hours, when Helen needed to finish her rounds. The next night, Crawford had asked if she wanted to read what he'd written. She'd said yes. He'd handed her a stack of papers covered in neat handwriting, technical descriptions of hunting that read like military field manuals, precise and detailed and completely focused on the craft. "You write like you're documenting evidence," she'd said after reading several pages. "Maybe I am. Evidence that I knew how to do something worth doing." In January, Crawford's treatment series ended. The doctors cleared him for discharge with the usual warnings: avoid cold weather when possible, don't overexert, return immediately if he started coughing blood again. He'd packed his few belongings, preparing to leave. Helen had found him in the lobby, dressed in civilian clothes, work pants, flannel shirt, jacket that was too thin for a Colorado winter. "Where will you go?" she'd asked. "Home, my father's house. Look for work somewhere, try to figure out what comes next." "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why don't you ever talk about Italy, about the war?" Crawford had been quiet for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular. "Because the soldier who fought in Italy doesn't exist anymore. He did his job and died. I'm what's left after that." "That doesn't make sense." "It does to me." He'd picked up his duffel bag. "Thank you for taking care of me these past months." Elijah. She'd used his first name for the first time, testing how it felt. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? when you're settled and feeling better." He'd look surprised. "Why?" "Because I think you're interesting, and because I'd like to know more about these mountains you write about constantly." "I'm not interesting. I'm a man who hunts deer and has damaged lungs and doesn't talk much." "That makes you exactly the kind of interesting that matters," Helen had said, "the kind that doesn't realize it." They'd had dinner the following week, and the week after that. And by March, Crawford was visiting Helen 3 evenings a week, teaching her about tracking and wildlife sign and the particular beauty of aspen groves in autumn light. They married on January 13th, 1946, in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Helen's parents attended. Crawford's father stood as best man. There were no other guests. No military friends. Crawford didn't keep in touch with anyone from Company I. No extended family, just the people who mattered most. After the ceremony, Helen asked about the medal on the mantel at his father's house. Crawford took her there and showed her the framed citation. "That was earned by a soldier," he said quietly. "I'm not a soldier anymore. I hunt deer and I'm married to you. That's who I choose to be now." Helen read the citation, the description of Hill 424, the machine gun positions, the improvised tactics, the posthumous award. She looked at the medal itself, the blue ribbon and 5-pointed star. Then she looked at her husband. "They think you're dead," she said. "The army listed me as missing, presumed dead. When they awarded the medal, they gave it to my father posthumously." "But you're alive, standing right here." "Technically, yes." "Elijah, you need to correct this. You earned that medal. It belongs to you, not to some ghost. That medal belongs to the man who crawled up Hill 424 and killed 9 Germans before breakfast. I'm not that man anymore. I don't want to be that man. I want to be a husband who hunts mule deer and lives quietly." Helen had stared at him, trying to understand. "So you're just going to let the army think you're dead? Forever?" "If they let me, yes. That's—" She'd stopped, searching for the right word. "That's really strange, Elijah." "I know." Helen never pushed the issue again, but sometimes Crawford would catch her looking at the medal on his father's mantel after they'd moved in with his father to help care for him in his declining years, and he knew she was thinking about the man who'd earned it, wondering what had happened on Hill 424 that had convinced her husband he'd died there. Crawford never told her the details, not in 1946, not in the years that followed. The helmet trick, the crawl under fire, the grenade throws, the rifle shots at point-blank range, all of it stayed locked away in the part of his mind where the war lived, separate from his civilian life. He'd built a wall between who he'd been and who he was now. The wall was necessary. Without it, he'd go insane trying to reconcile the hunter who respected clean kills with the soldier who'd killed 9 men in an hour. Better to keep them separate. Better to let the soldier stay dead. March 1947. Re-enlistment. Civilian life wasn't working. Crawford had tried. Worked as a carpenter's assistant for 3 months, then as a stock clerk at a hardware store for another 2 months. The work was fine, the pay was adequate, but something was missing: structure, purpose, the clear chain of command and defined objectives that military life provided. In March 1947, Crawford re-enlisted in the US Army, not for combat duty. His medical profile prohibited that permanently. The tuberculosis had left permanent scar tissue in his lungs, reduced breathing capacity, chronic susceptibility to respiratory infections. He would never pass a combat physical again. But the Army needed administrative personnel, clerks, supply sergeants, people who could process paperwork and manage logistics and keep the vast bureaucratic machine running. Crawford was assigned to Fort Carson, near Colorado Springs. Administrative duties, filing reports, managing personnel records. Boring work, but honest work. And it came with steady pay and housing and the familiar rhythms of military life. Helen supported the decision. She understood that Crawford needed structure more than he needed freedom. "Just promise me you'll come home every night," she'd said. "No volunteering for anything that looks dangerous." "I promise. My war is over." In 1954, the U.S. Air Force Academy opened in Colorado Springs. The academy needed support staff, maintenance workers, administrative personnel, custodial services. Crawford, now 39 years old, with 7 years of satisfactory but unremarkable military administrative service, applied for a civil service position. He was hired as a janitor, third-floor dormitory maintenance, 4:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift, 5 days per week. The work was simple: mop floors, empty trash, clean restrooms, keep the building presentable for cadets who would become Air Force officers. Perfect. Crawford worked as a janitor at the Air Force Academy for the next 33 years. Showed up every morning at 4:30, mopped the same floors in the same pattern, emptied the same trash cans, went home at 2 p.m., spent his weekends hunting in the San Isabel when his health permitted. The cadets never learned his name. He was just the janitor on third floor, part of the background, like the walls and floors and fluorescent lights. Invisible, anonymous, exactly what Crawford wanted. In all those years, he never once told anyone about Hill 424, never mentioned the helmet trick, never spoke about the 51 minutes that had earned him a Medal of Honor that sat in a frame on his father's mantle with the designation posthumous. The Dead Man's Medal. Let it stay that way. U.S. Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs, January 1984, 30 years later. Cadet Marcus Dunbar was 22 years old, senior year at the Air Force Academy, military history major with a 3.7 GPA, and hopes for a commission followed by assignment to Strategic Air Command. His senior thesis was due in April. The topic he'd chosen in September had seemed straightforward. Medal of Honor recipients from Colorado, a historical analysis. Colorado had produced 68 Medal of Honor recipients across multiple wars, from the Civil War through Vietnam. Dunbar would research their actions, analyze commonalities, draw conclusions about heroism and military culture. Clean academic project with clear structure. Should write itself. Except one recipient kept bothering him. Elijah Crawford, PFC, Company 1, 142nd Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division, Altavilla, Italy, September 13, 1943. Posthumous. The citation described extraordinary individual action, single-handedly destroying 3 machine gun positions under fire using improvised tactics, enabling his company to seize Hill 424 with minimal casualties. The medal had been awarded posthumously in 1944 after Crawford was listed as missing in action, presumed dead. Standard heroism narrative. Except 3 details didn't fit. First, no body had been recovered. The citation said, killed in action, but German records that Dunbar had found in the National Archives indicated several Americans from Company I had been captured on September 13, 1943. Was Crawford among them? Second, the tactics described, using a helmet as a decoy to draw fire, didn't appear in any U.S. Army field manual prior to 1945, but post-1945 infantry manuals specifically referenced Altavilla tactics and recommended decoy techniques for locating enemy positions. Someone had documented Crawford's innovation and incorporated it into doctrine. Third, when Dunbar had been cross-referencing Academy employment records for a different project, he'd found a name that made him stop breathing. Elijah Crawford, Civil Service, Custodial/Maintenance, Third Floor Dormitory, hired 1954, born 1915, Pueblo, Colorado. Same name, same hometown, same birth year that would make him 28 in 1943 and 69 now in 1984. Could be coincidence, common name. Except when Dunbar checked additional details, service record notation U.S. Army 1942 to 1945, discharge location Fort Carson, Colorado, the probability of coincidence dropped to nearly 0. Dunbar spent a week trying to dismiss it, spent another week unable to think about anything else. Finally, on a Saturday morning in January, he went to the third-floor dormitory and looked for the janitor. He found Crawford in the East Wing hallway, mopping floors in that distinctive grid pattern Dunbar had seen hundreds of times without really seeing it. Old man, thin, grey hair, weathered face, moving slowly but efficiently, like someone who'd done this exact task 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. "Excuse me, sir." The janitor looked up from his mop. "Yeah? Are you Elijah Crawford?" "That's what my name tag says." He gestured to the small plastic tag pinned to his shirt. E. Crawford. Dunbar felt his heart accelerate. "Did you serve in World War II?" The janitor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Wariness. Maybe recognition that this conversation was going somewhere he didn't want it to go. "Long time ago." "What unit?" A pause. 36th Division, 142nd Infantry. "Were you at Altavilla?" "In Italy. September 1943? The janitor set down his mop slowly. He looked at Dunbar for a long moment, and Dunbar saw something in that look he couldn't quite identify. Not fear, not anger, but maybe resignation. "Why are you asking?" "I'm writing my senior thesis on Medal of Honor recipients from Colorado. One of them was named Elijah Crawford, from Pueblo. He served in the 142nd Infantry. The citation says he was killed at Altavilla in September 1943. That's what they say." "Are you him?" Another long pause. Then, "You should talk to the superintendent about this. This isn't a conversation for a hallway." February 8th, 1984. The ceremony. The parade ground at the U.S. Air Force Academy could hold 4,000 cadets in formation when necessary. Today, it held exactly 4,000, every cadet at the Academy, in dress uniform, ranks aligned with mechanical precision, standing at attention under a cold February sky. Elijah Crawford stood off to the side of a podium that had been erected at the center of the formation, wearing a dress uniform for the first time since 1947. The uniform was new. They'd had to get him one, since his old service dress from 1945 no longer fit his thinner frame. The dress blues felt strange after 30 years of janitor coveralls. Too tight across the shoulders despite being tailored. Too formal. Too much attention. Helen stood in the front row of civilian spectators, crying already, and the ceremony hadn't even started. Crawford caught her eye and tried to communicate reassurance with his expression. She'd finally heard the full story last month, after Cadet Dunbar's discovery and the subsequent investigation. Crawford had told her everything. The crawl up Hill 424, the helmet trick, the grenades and rifle shots, the capture while trying to save a wounded soldier, the 20 months as a POW. "Why didn't you tell me?" Helen had asked through tears. "Because that wasn't the man you married," Crawford had said. "You married someone who hunts deer and works as a janitor, not someone who killed 9 Germans before breakfast." President Ronald Reagan stood at the podium now, preparing to read the citation that Crawford had heard once before, in 1984, when his father had received it. Reagan's voice carried across the parade ground, amplified by speakers. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty." Crawford watched the cadets standing in formation. 4,000 young people who would become Air Force officers, who would lead troops and make decisions and possibly die in wars that hadn't started yet. Some of them were looking at him, the old janitor they'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing, trying to reconcile the elderly man in dress blues with the soldier described in the citation. Private First Class Elijah Crawford, on September 13, 1943, near Altavilla, Italy, single-handedly attacked and destroyed 3 enemy machine gun positions. Crawford's mind wandered to San Isabel National Forest, to hunting at 7,000 feet where the air was thin and cold, to the patience required to track mule deer through aspen groves, to his father's lessons about clean kills and respect for what you took. That's what he wanted to be remembered for, not the war, not the killing, the hunting, the mountains, the quiet discipline of doing difficult things properly. Using improvised tactics and exceptional individual courage, the helmet trick. That's what they were really talking about. The simple deception that had worked 3 times because it exploited trained responses. German gunners had been taught to shoot at movement. Crawford had given them movement to shoot at, but the movement wasn't him. By the time they realized the deception, It was too late. Simple, effective, repeatable. Killed 9 enemy soldiers and secured strategic terrain, enabling his company to advance with 0 casualties. 9 Germans. 9 young men who'd been doing their jobs, following orders, defending positions they'd been ordered to hold. Professional soldiers. Crawford hadn't hated them. Still didn't. They'd been on opposite sides of a war neither of them had started. Exemplifying the highest traditions of military service and reflecting great credit upon himself and the United States Army. Reagan finished reading and approached Crawford. He held the Medal of Honor, the same medal that had been sitting on Crawford's father's mantle for 40 years, the one marked posthumous. Reagan placed it around Crawford's neck for the second time, first time in person. The blue silk ribbon felt light against his uniform collar. The 5-pointed star hung heavy on his chest. The cadets stood and applauded. 4,000 hands clapping in a parade ground. The sound was enormous, echoing off the surrounding buildings, rolling across the Colorado landscape. Crawford stood at attention and wished desperately that he was anywhere else, hunting in San Isabel, mopping floors in an empty building, sitting quietly with Helen at home. Anywhere but here, being celebrated for 51 minutes of violence 41 years ago. The applause finally ended. Crawford remained at attention until Reagan shook his hand and released him. Then the formation was dismissed, and people crowded around. Cadets wanting to shake his hand, officers congratulating him, reporters asking questions. One reporter pushed through the crowd. "Mr. Crawford, how does it feel to finally receive your medal in person?" Crawford thought about the question. "I received it 40 years ago when they gave it to my father. Today is just paperwork correction." "What do you want people to know about your actions at Altavilla?" "That simple tactics work when complex plans fail. That innovation matters more than firepower sometimes. That a helmet on a stick saved American lives because it made German soldiers react before they could think." "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Crawford looked at the reporter, at the crowd of cadets and officers and civilians, all waiting for his answer. He thought about the 9 Germans he'd killed, about the 20 months in Stalag 7A, about 30 years mopping floors while wearing the name tag of a dead man. "The heroes died on Hill 424, he said finally. "They charged straight up into machine gun fire because their officers ordered them to. I disobeyed orders and went alone. If I'd failed, only I would have died. That's not heroism, that's just practical risk management." The reporters wrote that down, but Crawford could see they didn't understand. They wanted a story about courage and sacrifice and selfless service. He'd given them a story about hunting tactics applied to combat, about exploiting enemy training, about doing what needed to be done because no one else was going to do it. Not the same thing. Cadet Dunbar found Crawford after the reporters dispersed. "Sir, I wanted to thank you for letting me discover this, for not staying hidden forever." "I wasn't hiding," Crawford said. "I was living a different life. There's a difference." "Will you keep working at the academy?" "Until I retire in 3 years. Then I'll go home, hunt as long as my lungs allow, and try to write down everything my father taught me, so someone else can learn it after I'm gone." "You're still writing about hunting?" Crawford pulled a folded piece of paper from his uniform pocket, notes he'd written that morning about tracking in snow, old habits dying hard, even on the day of his Medal of Honor ceremony. "Every day. The war was 51 minutes. Hunting has been my whole life. I know which one matters more." March 1987. Retirement. Elijah Crawford retired from the U.S. Air Force Academy in March 1987 after 33 years of civil service. They gave him a plaque and a certificate and a small ceremony attended by Academy officials who'd only learned 3 years ago that their janitor was a Medal of Honor recipient. He was 72 years old. The tuberculosis had left him with 40% lung capacity. Walking uphill required frequent stops. Hunting at 7,000 feet in San Isabel was becoming impossible. He and Helen moved into a small house in Pueblo, the same house his father had lived in until his death in 1978. The house where the Medal of Honor still sat on the mantel in its frame, though the posthumous designation had been officially corrected in 1984. Crawford spent his retirement doing three things: caring for Helen, who developed arthritis in her 60s, writing detailed notes about hunting techniques, and taking short walks in the foothills west of Pueblo when his breathing permitted. He stopped hunting in 1995 at age 80. His lungs couldn't handle the elevation anymore, but he continued writing about hunting until the year he died. Detailed technical notes about tracking, shot placement, field dressing, weather reading, deer behavior, everything his father had taught him, documented for whoever came after. March 15, 2000. The end. Elijah Crawford died at 04:37 hours on a Wednesday morning at his home in Pueblo. He was 85 years old. The tuberculosis that had been diagnosed in the Stalag 7A 56 years earlier had finally accomplished what German machine guns never could. It stopped his breathing permanently. Helen was with him at the end. So was his hunting journal from Stalag 7A, the 48 wood scraps that Cadet Dunbar had retrieved from the National Archives in 1984. The scraps were framed now, hanging on the bedroom wall where Crawford could see them every morning when he woke up. The funeral was small. Helen. A few distant cousins from Helen's side. Former colleagues from the academy. The governor of Colorado, who'd ordered state flags lowered to half-staff. Colonel Marcus Dunbar, now stationed at Peterson Air Force Base after a successful Air Force career. They buried Crawford at the Air Force Academy Cemetery with full military honors. 3 volleys of rifle fire. Taps played by a bugler. The flag from his casket folded into a triangle and presented to Helen, who clutched it to her chest and cried for the man she'd been married to for 54 years. The headstone was simple. Elijah Crawford, PFC, U.S., Army Medal of Honor, 1915 to 2000. No mention of Altavilla, no description of the helmet trick, no detailed accounting of his actions. Just name, rank, and the medal that had defined him, whether he'd wanted it to or not. Colonel Dunbar spoke at the graveside service. I met Elijah Crawford in 1984 when he was a janitor, and I was a cadet who thought I'd discovered a forgotten hero. But he taught me something more important than heroism. He taught me that extraordinary actions don't require extraordinary recognition, that doing what needs to be done, then living quietly with the consequences, takes a different kind of courage. He did something remarkable at Altavilla in 51 minutes. Then he spent 60 years being deliberately unremarkable. That's the lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. After the service, Helen gave Colonel Dunbar a package. Elijah wanted you to have this. Inside was a German Stahlhelm, battered, rusted, with 6 bullet holes punched through the crown and brim. He kept it? Dunbar asked, shocked. He retrieved it in 1985. Made a special trip to Italy, climbed Hill 424 one last time, found this helmet still lying in the rocks where it had fallen 42 years earlier. He never told anyone except me. Why did he want me to have it? He said you understood what it represented. Not killing Germans. Innovation. Using what you have to accomplish what needs doing. He thought you should teach that principle to others. Dunbar held the helmet carefully, feeling the weight of it, the history embedded in damaged steel. This helmet had been part of the tactic that entered military field manuals and influenced infantry training for decades. This helmet represented the moment when one creative soldier had changed tactical doctrine through sheer practical necessity. I'll put it in the Academy Museum, Dunbar said, with the full story, so cadets understand that innovation matters as much as courage. Helen nodded. He'd like that. Epilogue. Legacy. The German Stahlhelm went on display at the Air Force Academy Museum in June 2000 in a glass case dedicated to Elijah Crawford. The exhibit explained the helmet trick in detail, how Crawford had mounted the helmet on a stick to draw fire, how German gunners had reacted to movement before confirming threats, how this simple deception had enabled Crawford to locate and destroy 3 machine gun positions. Cadets still study the exhibit today, not as a lesson in heroism, but as a case study in creative problem-solving under pressure, in using available resources imaginatively, in understanding that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. Military instructors use Crawford's story in tactical training. When complex plans fail, simple deceptions may succeed. Study your enemy's training, exploit their predictable responses. Innovation comes from understanding principles, not memorizing procedures. The helmet trick appears in modern infantry field manuals under decoy tactics for position location. The technique has been used in every American conflict since World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Soldiers who never knew Crawford's name have used his innovation to locate enemy positions and save friendly lives. That's the legacy that mattered to Crawford, not the medal, not the recognition, but the practical technique that continued saving lives long after he was gone. In the National Archives, 48 wood scraps sit in a storage box covered in charcoal, writing about deer hunting in the San Isabel National Forest. Written by a man who wanted to be remembered for what he loved, not what he killed. Written in a German prison camp by someone who understood that holding on to humanity required writing about mountains and patience and clean kills instead of writing about war. Both legacies survive: the war hero and the hunter, the man who crawled up hill 424 and the man who mopped floors for 30 years, the Medal of Honor recipient and the janitor who wrote about tracking mule deer on salvaged wood, Elijah Crawford. All of these men, none of these men, a life lived in the space between who others thought he should be and who he knew himself to be. The helmet sits in its case at the Academy, 6 bullet holes clearly visible. The hunting journal sits in its archive box, words still readable after 65 years. In 2015, an Academy cadet researching Crawford's life read the hunting journal and asked Colonel Dunbar, "Why did he write about hunting instead of the war?" Dunbar looked at the German helmet in its museum case, at the bullet holes that had saved American lives by drawing fire meant for Crawford himself. "Because he already knew how to fight wars," Dunbar said quietly. "He was trying to remember how to live in peace." The helmet remains on display. The journal remains in the archives. Both testify to the same truth, that what we do when survival is no longer in question reveals more about who we are than what we do when death is breathing down our necks. Crawford survived Altavilla, survived Stalag 7A, survived tuberculosis, survived recognition he never wanted, and through it all, he wrote about mountains and patience and the clean kills that his father had taught him to value above everything else except honor itself. That was the man. That was the life. The war was just 51 minutes that happened in between.